A few years ago, I moved to a small town for my first real job. I rented a tiny one-story house with 2 bedrooms and 1 bathroom, just enough space for me to live comfortably and have guests over sometimes. My landlord, Sarah, was really nice and seemed happy to rent to me. I had been living there for a few weeks without any problems. One night, I was at home when I heard a knock at the door. It was late, and I wasn't expecting anyone. I walked up to the door and asked, "Who is it?" But no one answered. I didn't open it. Something about it made me uneasy. The next morning, as I was leaving for work, I saw a sticky note taped to the outside of the door. It said, "Hello, beautiful." My stomach dropped. I immediately thought about the knock from the night before. It had to be the same person. But who? I crumpled the note and threw it away, hoping it was just a one-time thing. That night, while I was cooking dinner, I heard another knock. This time, I didn't say anything. I just stood there, listening. My house didn't have a peephole or any windows by the door, so I had no way of seeing who it was without opening it. And that wasn't going to happen. At this point, I started to feel scared. This wasn't just some random mistake. It was happening again. I called my parents for advice. My dad, who used to be a police officer, told me that unless the police caught the person in the act, they wouldn't be able to do much. He told me to be careful, not go outside at night, and to call him if it happened again. He said if things got worse, he would come stay with me. The next morning, I checked the door again, and my heart sank. There was another note. This one said, "I like to watch you." I took a picture of it and sent it to my family and Sarah. I asked Sarah if she had any problems with stalkers or knew anyone who might be doing this. She seemed shocked and said she had no idea who it could be. She reassured me that she had never dealt with anything like this before. I decided to leave a note on the door before I went to work. It said, "If you're looking for Sarah, she doesn't live here. She only rents out this house. If you come back, I will call the police." That night, I was anxious, expecting to hear knocks again, but nothing happened. I finally got some sleep, thinking my note had scared them off. But the next morning, when I went to remove my note, I realized there was a different one in its place. It said, "I'm not looking for Sarah. I'm looking for you, Emily. I like watching you." Seeing my name written on that note made my stomach twist. This person knew who I was. I sent a picture to my dad right away. He told me he was coming to stay with me and left immediately. That whole day at work, I felt sick with worry. I couldn't focus on anything except wondering who was doing this. Could it be someone I knew? There was a creepy guy at work named Greg, but I had no proof. That night, my dad and I called the police. We waited until late, hoping whoever was leaving the notes might be lurking outside. When the officer arrived, my dad explained everything to him. The officer took a report, but told us that unless they caught the person in the act, there wasn't much they could do. After the officer left, my dad sat outside for hours, keeping watch. I went to bed, but I barely slept. Thankfully, the stalker never returned after that night. A few days later, I packed up and moved out as fast as I could. Sarah was very understanding. Whoever was leaving those notes never followed me to my new place, which meant it probably wasn't someone I worked with. I never found out who it was, and to this day, I still don't know. When I was 20, I spent a lot of time alone at my parents' house. We had a small lake right behind our backyard, and on the other side of it was a public park. The houses in our neighborhood were far apart, and it was an expensive area, so the properties were big. My parents had more than one house, so they were often away, leaving me alone. I had already moved out, but this happened when I was still in college. It was a random summer night. I wasn't sure if it was a weekday or the weekend, but since I was home, it was probably just a regular weekday. I was in the sunroom, watching TV. That was my favorite spot in the summer because of the cool breeze. I was sitting in the corner of the couch, right next to the window, when I heard splashing outside. It came from the lake. At first, I ignored it. Ducks and geese sometimes fought in the water, making a lot of noise. But after a while, the splashing didn't stop. It sounded heavier, too loud to be from a bird. I lowered the TV volume and listened carefully. Then, I pressed my ear against the window. The splashes were still going, and they sounded like a person was in the water. Curious, I stepped out onto the back deck. The yard was completely dark. Then, I heard something even stranger. Humming. A man was humming while swimming in the lake. Someone was trespassing. Each house on the lake owned a part of it, so nobody else should have been there. I went back inside and turned on the deck lights. The second the lights came on, the splashing and humming stopped. Whoever was in the water saw me. I wondered if it was a neighbor, but nobody ever swam in that lake. And even if it was a neighbor, I wasn't about to go outside and confront them. I turned off the lights, locked the door, and texted my brother, who was away at college. He didn't answer right away. I tried to focus on my show, but I couldn't. Something about the whole thing felt off. I glanced outside, but it was too dark to see anything. Then I heard it. A sound on the deck. I grabbed the remote and turned off the TV. The room went dark. At first, there was silence, but then I heard something much worse. Heavy breathing. It was coming from right outside the window. My heart started racing. I quickly laid down on the couch, trying to stay hidden. Then, after a moment of silence, a deep voice spoke from outside the window. "I see you." I felt sick. My whole body tensed up. I didn't know whether to stay quiet or say something, so I just blurted out, "Paul, is that you?" Paul was one of our neighbors. No response, just silence. Then I heard slow footsteps walking away. The steps sounded like someone was barefoot. I stayed frozen on the couch for several minutes, too scared to move. Finally, I snapped out of it. I needed to check the doors. I jumped up and ran to the front door. Locked. Then I checked the side door, also locked. I texted my family, explaining what happened. My dad told me to turn on the backyard lights and check if anyone was still out there. He told me to be the man of the house and protect it. I didn't want to, but I listened. I grabbed a big kitchen knife and carefully stepped onto the deck. At first, everything looked normal. Then, I looked down. There were wet footprints. Barefoot footprints. They had started drying, but I could still see them clearly. They led around the side of the deck. I followed the trail, and that's when I saw it. A person was hiding. Just their forehead and eyes peeked over the edge of the deck, like they had heard me coming and were waiting. The moment we made eye contact, the person turned and disappeared. I didn't hesitate. I ran inside and locked everything. Then, I called 911. When the police arrived, they asked if we had any enemies or problems with our neighbors. They searched the area but found nothing. That night, I shut every window and turned on the air conditioning for extra security. When I woke up in the morning, I was just happy to see daylight. I don't think that person ever came back. But to this day, we still don't know who it was. What I'm about to tell you is the reason my parents moved out of a house that had been in our family for 3 generations. I've struggled with feeling sad and useless for most of my life. Things are better now, but when I was a kid, it was really bad. Because of that, I spent a lot of time alone in my room. Our house was surrounded by trees on 3 sides. A thick forest separated us from any neighbors. My bedroom was pretty big, and it was in the back corner of the house, with 2 walls facing the woods. At night, it was scary. I was afraid of the dark, which didn't help. Strange things started happening when I was about 10 years old. I was in 5th grade, old enough that my parents didn't let me sleep in their room after nightmares, but young enough that they still thought I had a wild imagination. It all started with my nightlight. It was a small light with different color settings, and I always kept it on red. One night, I randomly woke up, which almost never happened. I was really tired, so I fell back asleep quickly, but before I did, I noticed something odd. The nightlight wasn't red. At first, I didn't think much of it, but about a week later, I woke up again, and once more, the nightlight was on the wrong color. In the morning, I asked my parents why they were messing with it. They looked confused and said they hadn't touched it. When I explained, they told me the nightlight had always been glitchy. I trusted them, so I believed it, until one morning, I woke up to find the nightlight completely unplugged, lying on the floor. When I told my parents, they brushed it off. My dad told me I was too old for a nightlight anyway and should focus on school. A few days later, the nightlight disappeared completely. It was just gone. I knew my parents had taken it, even though they denied it. They probably thought I was too old for it and just didn't want to admit they had removed it. We had a big fight, each of us blaming the other for hiding it. For the next week, everything seemed normal. Then, things got worse. For 3 nights in a row, I woke up suddenly in the middle of the night. Each time, I had no idea why. The 4th night, when it happened again, I told my parents. They said it was because I was growing up and that changes in my body were normal. But the next time it happened, I decided to stay awake. A few minutes after I woke up, I heard something. A faint rustling noise coming from my closet. I told my parents the next morning, but they didn't believe me. My dad even checked my closet and found nothing but old toys and posters. Then, the noises kept happening. For 4 nights in a row, I woke up to the sound of something moving in my closet. I was terrified. I begged my parents to listen to me, but my dad got angry. He dragged me to my closet to prove there was nothing there. He started throwing my toys out, emptying the closet bit by bit while yelling at me. Then, he ripped one of the posters off the wall, and we saw it, a giant hole in the wall, hidden behind the poster. My mom screamed. My dad grabbed a flashlight and tried to see where it led, but the hole was too deep. He ran outside to check the house. That's when he found it. At the base of the house, hidden in the dirt, was a small opening. When he dug into it, he realized it wasn't just a hole, it was a tunnel leading from the woods to my bedroom. That night, my mom and I packed our things and stayed at my aunt's house. We never spent another night in that home. I stayed with my aunt until we officially moved out. My parents refused to talk about what happened. I think they feel guilty for not believing me. It still chills me to think about it. For over a month, someone had been in my room, watching me, listening. I don't know what they wanted, and I probably never will. But if your child tells you something strange is happening, please believe them. I'll be honest with you. I've probably spent more time chasing women than I'd like to admit. I've had to tone it down a lot since college, partly because of what I'm about to tell you. I went to school in Arizona, and while I haven't been back in a while, when I was there, the culture was very open, and when I say open, I mean sexual. This honestly could have been true for other colleges in other states at the time, but I really wouldn't know. It was my sophomore year, and I had just finished pledging the fraternity Sigma Delta. About halfway through the semester, though, I was getting sick of only talking to sorority girls that seemed to know half the guys in every frat. It was honestly a little gross, and I started developing a fear that every girl I was interested in had been with several people I personally knew. I tried my luck and created a Tinder profile. It wasn't long before I matched with someone whose interests seemed to match mine. We started talking, and things were going well. After a few days, we made plans to meet up at a local college bar called The Saloon on a Saturday night. This was actually my favorite bar in the area because it had pool tables, and I had been clearing racks since I was 9 years old. I remember getting there a little early so I could secure a table and warm my muscles up a bit. An hour passed, though, and I came to terms with the fact that I had probably been stood up. I was trying to decide whether I should salvage the night or just go home and play online chess when I got a notification. To my surprise, it was Anna, the girl I was waiting on, telling me she had just arrived. I greeted her, and she apologized for being late. We got some drinks, played some pool, and got to know each other. She was Latina and a heavy drinker, so I got plastered just trying to keep up. At one point, she asked for my Instagram, which I gave to her. A few seconds later, I found myself staring at a collection of explicit photos she had just sent me. I was confused, but in my drunken state, I wasn't going to complain. Before I could even respond, she told me, "Your turn," which I figured could only mean one thing. Honestly, if I hadn't been so drunk, I probably would have questioned why we were sending pictures to each other when we were literally 5 feet apart, but I didn't have the foresight. I complied with her request. We laughed about the whole thing, and that was that. A few hours later, things at the bar were starting to wind down. I was planning on inviting her to my place, but she beat me to it, asking if I could spend the night at hers. I agreed, and we left the bar. I couldn't even walk in a straight line. It was honestly embarrassing. We Ubered to her apartment, which was actually in Tucson, something I hadn't realized before. Honestly, red flags should have been going off in my brain the moment we crossed into Tucson. She unlocked the door of her apartment and stepped aside so I could go first. I took a few steps inside and heard the door shut behind me. It was pitch black in there. As I was turning around to ask her to flip some lights on, the room lit up. To my horror, I wasn't facing a harmless 5'4" girl anymore. Instead, 2 massive bald dudes with tank tops were standing in front of the door with their hands clasped. I turned around, and there was another bald dude in front of me. I wish I could tell you more about the room I was in, but it was honestly difficult for me to recall small details of that night. I couldn't fight or flee, so I just froze. The guy in front of me began telling me my own name, birthday, and age. He then went on to say that the girl I had just gone out with was 16, meaning I had received and sent explicit pictures to a minor. He then suggested that I do what I was told, which I did. The 2 guys behind me confiscated my phone, wallet, and keys, all of which I gave up without a fight. I asked the guy in front of me what he wanted, and he basically told me that he was a major distributor of illicit substances in Arizona. He told me that I'd be outed as a pedophile if I didn't distribute his product to my fraternity and university. I wish I could remember more specifics. The 2 men behind me then gave me a piece of paper and told me to write down my address, followed by a list of names and numbers for as many students as I knew. I told them that I'd need my phone to complete the list, so one of them held it firmly in front of me and let me scroll through. All 3 of them were hovering over me now, knowing I was basically checkmated. I don't know what compelled me to do it, but the literal second I saw a chance, I ran. I was too drunk to think about the consequences of those pictures on my phone. I narrowly escaped out the door I had entered from and ran as fast as I possibly could. It's not like I was safe, though. I was still smack dab in one of the most dangerous places in Arizona. Eventually, I found a nice-looking house and begged them to open up. I pleaded with them to let me use their phone and call 911, and then I told the police everything. But of course, I didn't remember the address of that girl's apartment. An officer picked me up and took down a report before asking me if I would be okay leading them back to that apartment. I was actually able to retrace the way I had run, and I waited in one of the squad cars as the police barged in. After a few minutes, an officer told me that the place was completely deserted and there were no signs that people had even been there. The whole thing felt like a bad dream, but I knew it was real. Sitting in the back of that squad car, I was shaken to my core. My heart pounded, not just from the terror of what had happened, but from the realization of how close I had come to something far worse. I thought about all the ways I could have avoided the situation. how I could have said no to the explicit photos, how I could have trusted my gut when things felt off. But I didn't. And now, I had narrowly escaped becoming part of something I couldn't even comprehend. The police never found that apartment. No one could piece together what had really gone down that night. The guys, the girl, the drugs, they all vanished into thin air. But I was left with something that was just as real, a scar on my conscience. That experience changed me. I thought I knew what risk was, but I had no idea what I was getting myself into. I don't know what happened to Anna or the men who held me hostage that night. All I know is that I'll never look at the world the same way again. I've toned it down since then, tried to stay out of risky situations, and rebuilt my life. But I'll never forget the fear, the regret, or the lesson that I learned the hard way. Sometimes, it's not just about what you're doing in the moment, but where it could take you when you least expect it. And if you're not careful, it could cost you everything. It was a normal Friday afternoon in high school. I was walking down the hallway with my friend Emma. She was talking about something, but I wasn't really listening. I had too much on my mind. Problems at school, problems at home. My foster parents weren't exactly kind, to say the least. As we passed the lunchroom, I suddenly needed to use the bathroom. I asked Emma if she needed to go too. She said no, so she waited outside while I went in. Right away, I noticed something strange. The bathroom was empty. That was weird because this bathroom was always crowded. But I shrugged it off and went into a stall. Just as I sat down, I heard the door open and close. Someone else had come in, but I didn't hear them move. No footsteps, no sound at all. I figured they were just hiding from a teacher or something, so I didn't think much of it. I finished up, buttoned my jeans, and absent-mindedly read some of the graffiti on the stall wall. Just random stuff about teachers and school. Then I heard the door open again. I assumed the person had left. I stepped out of the stall and walked toward the sink. When I reached the door, Emma was standing there, staring at me with a weird expression. It was a look of shock, like she had just seen something she couldn't explain. I asked her what was wrong. She hesitated, then asked, "Who was standing behind you in the stall?" Chills ran down my spine. I told her no one was in there with me. She had to be messing with me. But Emma wasn't joking. She said she had changed her mind about using the bathroom and walked in right before I came out. But when she did, she saw someone else in the stall with me. She said their shoes were right behind mine, standing so close their feet were touching the backs of my heels. That's when she got scared and left immediately. I tried to tell her it was impossible. I hadn't seen or heard anyone in there with me. But then I remembered. I had heard the door open and close twice. I felt sick. Later, I told a teacher, but she brushed it off. Said Emma was probably playing a joke. But Emma wasn't the type to make stuff up, especially not something like this. Even now at 18, I still think about it. I didn't believe in ghosts before that day. Now I'm not so sure. My name is Leo, and to be honest, I feel lost right now. I won't go into too much detail, but my family situation is really bad. For the past 3 years, I've tried to stay away from home as much as possible. My old high school friends are changing in ways I don't like, and my hometown feels empty to me now. I'm about to start my last year of college, and I have no idea what I'm going to do after that. But enough about that. Last year, I ended up in Berlin, probably trying to figure out my life or searching for some kind of purpose. One night, I was at a bar called Reduja. I was alone, which wasn't unusual for me. As I was getting ready to leave, I reached into my pocket and realized my apartment keys were gone. Just my luck. I left the bar and walked toward my apartment anyway, even though I knew I couldn't get inside. It was locked up, and it was way too late to get a new key. I didn't know what else to do. Then, to make things worse, it started raining. I needed a place to sleep, so I wandered around until I found a bridge. I sat underneath it, out of the rain. I didn't know exactly where I was, but at least I was dry. As I was drifting off to sleep, I heard voices from across the river. I sat up and saw 5 men standing near a small boat tied to the shore. They hadn't noticed me yet. It only took a minute for me to realize what was happening. It looked like some kind of drug deal or illegal exchange. I didn't understand much German, but I saw them handing off suitcases and bags. I figured it was best to stay still and wait for them to leave. Then, suddenly, one of the men yelled something angrily and pulled out a gun. There was a moment of silence. The man he was pointing at raised his hands and started speaking quickly, like he was pleading for his life. It looked like he had been set up. The other men forced him to take off his clothes and took his belongings. That was enough for me. I needed to leave. I stood up slowly, but just as I did, one of the men shouted. I didn't understand everything, but I caught the words, "There's someone there." I ran. I didn't look back. I heard them shouting more things, but the only words I understood were, "Don't shoot." I kept running until I was out of breath, until my stomach hurt, until I almost passed out. They didn't chase me, but they could have shot me. Even now, I still think about that night. If they had decided to pull the trigger, I wouldn't be here. Sometimes I feel like I'm running from something bigger than that moment, like I'll never stop running. I have a dog that I take for a walk 3 times every day, once in the morning, once in the afternoon, and finally at night. I always take the same path, which starts at our driveway and leads to a small parking lot for the apartment complex where I live. This will be important later. For some reason, I've always done our night walks very late. It's just a habit, and I've never had any problems. That was true until one night when something strange happened. As usual, I grabbed my flashlight because the parking lot has no lights. I also had one earbud in, listening to music, but I kept the other ear free in case I heard anything, and I did. As I got closer to the parking lot, I noticed a sound. At first, I wasn't paying attention because I was lost in my music. But then, something clicked in my brain and I stopped. I took out my earbud and listened carefully. Then I heard it again. A voice. It was coming from ahead of me, but I couldn't see anyone. I told myself it was just my imagination, so I slowly walked forward, but something about it felt off. I stopped again, standing near the parked cars. My flashlight moved across the empty lot, searching for anything unusual. Then, the creepiest thing happened. A muffled voice, sounding like a child, softly said one word, "Help." My whole body froze. My heart started pounding, and I pointed my flashlight everywhere, trying to see where it was coming from. It had to be near the cars, but I saw nothing. No child, no person at all. I looked at my dog, but he wasn't acting strange. He was just sniffing some bushes, like nothing was wrong. I started to think I imagined it, until I heard it again. "Help." 3 more times. This time, it came from my left, right where the cars were parked. Panic rushed through me. I knew I wasn't making this up because my dog suddenly perked his ears and looked in the same direction. That's when I realized just how disturbing this was. The voice sounded like a child, but something about it wasn't right. It was too flat, too lifeless, like a mix between a child and an adult speaking at the same time. And every time it said "help," the voice never changed. No fear, no urgency, nothing. Just the same exact tone, over and over again. That was enough for me. My dog and I ran home as fast as we could. I told my mom what happened, and she was confused but not too worried. I suggested calling the police in case someone really needed help, but she didn't think it was necessary. I still don't know what to make of it. Why was the voice muffled? Was someone hiding inside one of the cars? Or was it something else? Something waiting for me to get closer? I don't like thinking about it too much, but even now, the memory sends chills down my spine.